they're just basically a mercenary army.
Oh, absolutely. I always had some doubts about George Lincoln Rockwell, who was supposed to be influenced by me, but I went up and worked with Rockwell and lived with him and everything else, and I could never see anything serious going on there. It's just a charade.
Well, what was he doing? What was his story?
Oh, well, you know, he was the son of one of the most famous radio entertainers, Rockwell, and so his father had plenty of money, and he was just a spoiled guy.
Yeah, and what were you working with him doing?
Well, that was when he had the American Nazi Party. They created the American Nazi Party because Nazi was the most hated name in the world, and so by creating something like that, they had instant pandemonium in the United States. And Nazis.
Now, was he working for the Zionists?
Oh, yes.
He was.
No question about it, because nobody ever knew where a penny of Rockwell's financial support came from. There was no wealthy person behind him at all, but he had plenty of money. He could buy houses, and he had a staff there. He had 30 or 40 people living there. And all the time that I knew one fellow who helped him somewhat, as a wealthy man named Aerosmith. But he wasn't the chief financial supporter at all. He was just held for as the ostensible person who was backing Rockwell's operation.
Now, they have a long history of creating the opposition so that they have an enemy to point to, just like terrorism.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems, yeah. Now they create the false, fake anti-Semitism, and then turn around and say, "Look, they're trying to get us."
Well, that's absolutely true. In fact, whenever they call a person an anti-Semite, like myself or you, they're going after their enemy. It's an enemy that they've created themselves. It doesn't exist in the first place.
Yep. Well, it's worked pretty well, hasn't it?
It's always worked. That's the amazing thing, because they can depend on the knee-jerk reaction of every Jew in the country. Whenever you call a person an anti-Semite, well, that person, every Jew attacks him immediately, because that identifies, that names the enemy, and then they must go after him right away.
Well, I believe that even the Jewish community is starting to read the facts on the Internet. I believe that rank-and-file Jews in all parts of the world are starting to understand in some small way that maybe what they believed may not be entirely what's right.
Well, the Jews have been the most conned people of all, because every Jew has been totally conned by the Jewish leadership.
That's right. Yeah.
And
they seem to be the biggest victims, because in their name, all of these awful things are being done.
Oh, yes. And they're getting full blame for it, and there'll be retribution against them. Every Jew realizes this, that retribution is coming for all the stuff that the Jews have been accused of, whether they did it or not. And, you know, the entire Nazi movement was financed by two Jewish bankers, Oppenheimer and Warburg, in Hamburg, Germany.
Yeah. At the behest of Rothschild, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, that was a Rothschild operation. And there was no real anti-Semitism among the German people.
Now, have you heard of the Honig family of Austria? Honig?
Oh, I've heard of Honigs for years, yes.
They're part of the Federal Reserve ownership as well, aren't they?
Oh, yes, certainly. They were in on the ground floor.
Because I know that there's only 3 or 4 families that the Rothschilds intermarry with. Schiff, Warburg, Oppenheimer, and Honig are the ones that they actually allow their daughters or whatever to marry in with.
Oh, absolutely. And they have been consistent over the last 200 years in that.
Yeah.
So when you hear that name, Honig, you know that that's part of the operation.
Well, I was looking at the present list of Fed governors, and I saw, of course, I saw a Schiff on it, I saw a Honig on it, I saw, and you see these names and you say, oh, boy.
Oh, yeah.
How about Reynolds? How about R.J. Reynolds, the cigarette fortune? Are they connected to these crooks, too?
Well, they've always been controlled by them, because when they made a lot of money, the Reynolds family, and they're still an important family in Virginia and North Carolina, when they made big money, they were controlled right away, because you see, they always had to have money managers, just like they hired the Bush family to manage the fortunes of the Harriman family after they got Union Pacific Railway. and they move right in on them because they say, what are we going to do with all those hundreds of millions of dollars? And, oh, we'll take care of it for you. And Rothschild did that with the Elector of Hesse in Germany when they financed the Revolutionary War against the United States.
Yeah. Now, the Bush family, there was a new Bohemian named Solomon Bush that came over at the urgings of Rothschild during that formation period of some of the Masonic lodges. And there was another Bush, too, that came over. Are they related to the Bush family?
Well, it's all part of the same family. They go way back, and they were well known. They've always been in this up to their ears. They've never had any independence. They're just employees all the way.
Yeah, and back through Prescott Bush. This whole thing is so transparent when you look at the research, but the research is very hard to dig up and hard to find. If you go to a local library, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very obscure. It takes a lot of digging.
Well, every time we do an interview together, Eustace, there's a little more that comes out. There's a little more knowledge that we share. I don't get that we're going to get these people anytime soon, and I wonder if they really care very much how much about their operations we know, because it seems like they're still trying to do this criminal war with Iran, and don't they care that we're on to them?
Oh, well, it's been published so many times that this whole thing was a domino operation. They're going to take care of Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and finally Saudi Arabia. What they're really after is the Saudi Arabia oil fields. That's the prize. And they're going to keep pushing until they get it.
Now, what is that reasoning behind that, so they can keep their dollar system alive?
Well, that's part of keeping the world economy, the counterfeit money operation and circulation.
Because it is petrodollars that forces the rest of the world to do trading in dollars. I mean, in other words, if they control all the oil markets, the world still has to participate in the dollar scam, don't they?
Oh, yes. And they have to control the Arabs because they're too hard to keep working. And they've been wanting to get rid of the Arabs for years. Shimon Peres boasted they were going to kill every Arab in the Middle East, and they've been working at it, and they've been very successful.
Well, now, how much of this goes back to the City of London? Now, we know that their management system is in London and that the main Zionists don't live in Israel. They just control Israel from the outside.
Oh, absolutely.
Is London where they live, or are these people living worldwide in different places?
They're worldwide in different places, but the London Connection was the subtitle of my book, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, because the London Connection controls everything out of London. It's like British Secret Service. British Secret Service executed the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in Russia. It was purely a British operation with no Russians in it whatsoever.
Is that how they inserted those 4,000 Jews as top management people within Russia?
That's exactly right. They were there waiting to be called. They were there to start to work at any time, and it was all done by British Secret Service out of the Bank of England.
How did this group get selected, the Ashkenazi group, to be because they're not originally Jewish, they're converts to Judaism. How were they selected as the supremacist group?
Well, they've always used what they call conversos, or converts, as the real operators. These are people that are on the make, and they're looking to get into operation, and so they always get conversos, or converts, to do the dirty work.
But see, Judaism, its origins, of course, go back thousands of years, but the Ashkenazis go back to 750, 800, according to Arthur Kessler. And the fact is, how much Sephardic participation at the top is there?
Well, there's not a whole lot. It's Ashkenazi.
It is mostly Ashkenazi.
Absolutely. Because the Sephardic Jews were considered a higher type of Jews. They are very, very ancient Jews, and they have codes of honor and so forth. So the Sephardic were never allowed to be running the show. It was always Ashkenazi.